Okay, today we're going to talk about classical Eurasian empires. So, for the most part, we're just going to be talking about government. We'll talk about the cultures and the social hierarchies in a different lecture. And notice the title says Eurasian, so we're not going to be talking about anything in Africa or the Americas. So, our first question: what common features can you identify in the empires of the classical era? So, how are they similar, and in what ways do they differ from each other? So first we'll start with the common features, the similarities. Almost all the empires that existed in Eurasia controlled very large territories and they had large populations. So here on the right we have the Han Empire. You can see that it encompasses a very large part of what becomes modern day China. They were all also formed through conquest, so that means that they are conquering or taking over by force their neighbors. So the only way to expand is to take over territories, and a lot of times there were already people living there. So part of the ways that they're going to fund this is by taxing the people that they take over. So as they're expanding the empire, they're adding new people to the empire. They're going to tax those people so that they can pay their military to keep expanding. They all also represent what we like to call cultural diffusion. So that means as they're expanding, they're bringing their ideas, their cultures, so religions, languages, their values to the newly conquered people. So in the case of the Roman Empire, they take over most of the Mediterranean, and all of those regions, even though some of them are in places like North Africa, will be exposed to Roman learning, Greek learning. They'll be exposed to the Roman languages. So even though they're on different continents and different regions, they're going to be exposed to the ideas of the empire. All of them will try to create an imperial identity. So what this means is that they're trying to get the conquered people to stop seeing themselves as their previous identity. So let's say I lived in Turkey and I was taken over by the Roman Empire. Rather than seeing myself as someone from Turkey, they wanted me to see myself as a Roman, as a part of their empire now. And then all of them are all similar in that they all eventually fall apart. So here again, I've got a picture of the Persian Empire, so you can see how vast of a territory they controlled. Remember, again, this is 500 BCE, so we're not even into the Common Era yet, and they're controlling a good portion of the Middle East. The differences that they had is that some governments ruled using local elites. That means that they had local governors in control of different regions. So this would be prominent in places like India. The Persian Empire used local elites. The Greek city-states and Rome, to an extent, used local elites, versus using central authority, which the best example is China, where they have one emperor. He is the ultimate authority, and while he has people working under him, there aren't going to be as many local people who have a lot of power. Other differences: some were new to the region versus some were based on older traditions. Again, the ones based on older traditions, that's going to be China. So empires had already existed in China. So when new ones were formed, they used ideas from previous empires, whereas places like Rome, it was just a city. It had never been a part of an empire before. So as they are growing and expanding, they're kind of coming up with new ideas of their own rather than copying things that they had seen before. They differ in how long each of the empires lasted. Some lasted longer than others, and they all differed in the speed at which they assimilated conquered peoples. So that means the speed in which the newly taken over neighbors started to see themselves as members or citizens of that particular empire. Our second question: how did Rome specifically grow from one single city to the center of a huge empire? The main points are that Romans saw their political system and their beliefs as superior to everyone else. So to them, that justified taking over other people groups. And the ironic thing is that most of Rome's neighbors also saw the Roman values and their political system as better than their own. So a lot of their neighbors, especially in Italy, were very interested in becoming a part of the early Roman Empire. Rome also has a central location in the Mediterranean, so it's located in Italy, making it easy for the Romans to get to both the east and western sides of the Mediterranean Sea. Rome had a huge army. It was very well trained and they were known for being well fed. That part is important because if they were well fed, that meant that a lot of men were interested in being a part of the military. If they knew that they were going to be taken care of, they were interested in joining. So it contributed to the large size of the army. So the way they go from a city to an empire, they start by first taking over Carthage. It's in North Africa. Then they'll go east in the Mediterranean because of places like the Persian Empire. They know that there's a lot of money there, so they're going to go to gain wealth. And then after they kind of put down the eastern Mediterranean, they'll turn back and go to the west because as the empire gets bigger, they need more food. And the west, since it hadn't been a part of an empire before, had a lot of resources that hadn't been used up. So here you can see in the map, Rome was located here on the Italian peninsula. They're going to first go to battle with Carthage. Carthage was in control of all these light green territories. Then they're going to come over here and take over Greece and parts of the Persian Empire. And then slowly but surely they'll expand outward until at their height they controlled places as far away as Britain.
Okay, question number 3. Why was the Chinese Empire able to take shape so quickly while that of the Romans took centuries? This goes back to the idea that China was a place that's going to build on previous empires or previous dynasties, whereas Rome does not have any previous empire necessarily to build upon. Yes, they had the Greeks and they took some things from them. Yes, they went into areas where the Persian Empire had existed, but they were doing things their own way. So it wasn't like they were really building upon what was already there. China used their huge military power and, more importantly, extreme brutality when conquering. And this kind of brought people under them faster than the Romans, who were somewhat more, I guess, accepting of the differences that people had in the places that they conquered. The state of the Qin already had an effective bureaucracy and military. Again, they were building on what previous dynasties had already done, and so they didn't need to start from scratch, enabling them to become larger faster than the Roman Empire. So here you can see how they grew. So you have the Shang dynasty first, the Zhou dynasty second, which is a little bit bigger than the Shang dynasty, so they're just expanding outward from what they've already taken over. The Qin dynasty third, which, remember, China gets its name from the Qin dynasty. It expands even a little bit further. It expands further south than the Han dynasty, or than the Zhou dynasty had gone. And then lastly, you have the Han dynasty, which is going to be the biggest of the classical Chinese dynasties. Question 4. Why were centralized empires so much less prominent in India than in China? All right. A lot of this had to do with India's geography, just plain and simple. Because the geography was very mountainous and you had large river systems, people settled in different areas and didn't really communicate with one another. So they're going to establish their own cultures. They're going to establish their own traditions, their own languages, foods, things like that. So there isn't a lot of loyalty to one main government in India. They're just much more culturally diverse. The geography made unification under one ruler very, very difficult. Also, geography allowed for them to be more frequently invaded by nomads than with China, because China's so far off in the east. And the geography, again, just made travel much more difficult in the north than it made for China. So here you have the Mauryan Empire and the Gupta Empire. And one of the biggest differences between the between the Indian empires and the Chinese empires is that the Gupta, which came after the Mauryans, didn't build upon what the Mauryans had done. They were completely different. So yes, they ruled the same areas, but they did not have any sort of the same government. They just started over from scratch. Again, this is similar to Rome starting from scratch, whereas the Chinese dynasties built upon everything they already had.
And that's it.
How long is that?